management. Like, involve the people that are actually the ones interacting with the animals, because they're the ones that know, they're the ones that need to care for, they're the caretakers of the animals. So they're the ones that the animal rights organizations have the videos on, create a culture of care, because really it's a trickle down effect from the top to the bottom. And so management is the key.
Hello and welcome to the Poultry Podcast Show. Today I'm here with Dr. Shawna Weimer. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you today about some aspects of your poultry welfare work. But first, I'm sure everybody is excited to know, how did you start into chickens? How did you get a chicken job?
I just kind of fell into chickens, actually. As you know, and we're both very proud of, I went to Iowa State for undergrad. I think really I fell into chickens because I just love animals. I've always known since I've been old enough to be asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to work with animals. My grandfather unfortunately passed when I was pretty young, but my dad would tell me stories about helping him. My grandfather was a veterinarian. And so hearing stories about interacting with animals and, kind of back in the 60s and 70s when there was kind of a bartering, like he'd go out and preg check a cow and then bring some corn home. Like, I just thought that lifestyle sounded so great. I'm not going to talk about how they used to castrate cats, but anyway, I've always loved animals. I make a joke that I would work with earthworms, if that's what happened. But, I worked, my first project was with Anna Johnson. After taking her class, I became in love with the field of behavior, and I realized that there was a lot of human aspects of being a veterinarian that can be difficult and ethically difficult, and ethics are a big part of animal welfare. And I fell in love with it when I took Anna Johnson's class at Iowa State. And I did a small research project with her, actually temperament testing shelter dogs at the Animal Rescue League in Ankeny. And that was my first start. And then I worked with pigs with her for my master's, worked in the swine industry for a couple of years, and decided, I was in procurement and just I wasn't around the animals enough. And I decided to go back to grad school. I sent out hundreds of emails and got 2% response rate from professors. And it was either dogs in Norway or chickens in Arkansas. And I decided to go with chickens in Arkansas, and the rest is history.
That is quite a whirlwind.
And I like to make the joke that I switched from pigs to chickens, but I became a hog somehow when I went to chickens.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the Arkansas mascot, unfortunately, is not a chicken.
Yes, Tusk the Razorback.
Yeah, some people, I think, like to say that size, the Cyclones, he's a chicken, when they're rooting against us, but I think he's some sort of cardinal.
Yeah, I think he's a cardinal too. I've had this debate with people. It's like, he's in a cyclone, but he's like a bird. So
yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of things that can't be explained, but I think from a mascot perspective, it's easier for a guy to walk around in a bird suit than just a cycle.
Definitely.
Well, that's at least what I'm going to say.
DSM strives to bring our customers efficient, sustainable poultry solutions, from essential vitamins like HYD to next-generation products like Hyphorius for efficient phosphorus utilization, and Biofix to counteract naturally occurring metabolites in feed. Our portfolio is growing as we continue to bring innovation to the poultry industry. Visit dsm.com/ANH to learn more about our newest solutions.
Can you tell us a little bit about the path to your current employment? How did you end up where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I actually am in my PhD advisor's office. I worked with Yvonne Thaxton and Karen Christensen, co-advised, and I worked on broiler stress and lameness. The title of my dissertation was Non-Invasive Measures of Broiler Stress and Lameness. And I can get into that later if you want. Spent time here. I think that they really valued or were excited about me as a grad student because both of them had worked in industry for a long time in their careers, and I was working at Hormel as a hog buyer at the time. And I think they really valued that I had that industry experience. And so I came in, and when I graduated, I did a postdoc at Purdue with Darren Karcher and Marissa Erasmus, and worked on other poultry species. I did a little turkey work here, but we did some turkey, duck, laying hen work there, and it was a really great experience, all 15 months of it. And then I went to the University of Maryland, and I was there for 3 years. My position there was predominantly extension, and there are 5, and they actually have more broilers there than here in Arkansas. They're just condensed on Delmarva. Mm-hmm. That's why high path is such a big deal there, because and worked with some companies quite a bit out there doing grower workshops. Nutrient management is a much more regulated situation in Maryland. So we would do a lot of workshops where growers would get some credits for that. They have to maintain their certification. So a lot of grower education, but doing some applied research with Purdue and Mount Air are over there. And then I came back here last year. So I'm an assistant professor and the director of the Center for Food Animal Wellbeing at my alma mater. I can see the Razorback Stadium from my office window. I have a lot of friends and colleagues here that are awesome, and it really felt like coming home. I love this Northwest Arkansas area. I'm a lot closer to family in Iowa, so that's sort of been my path.
Yeah, that sounds like a win-win. So what are some of the things that you found interesting with working in your extension role versus what you're doing now at the center, and then also doing some research?
So there's a lot more, time in a more research-heavy appointment on granting and publications and things like that, which means more desk time. So The thing that I miss most about extension is actually going out into the field and talking with people. As an applied researcher, applied ethologist, so ethology is the study of animal behavior, it's the growers that know. Anything that I mention to them about why an animal might do something or a chicken might do something, they already know. They see it. They hear that their chickens are getting sick before they see any clinical behavioral signs. They're the ones that are actually there, and having those opportunities for those conversations is really what drives my research, because like I said, they know. They're kind of my sounding board, where I say, hey, is this really that important? And they'll tell you yes or no. I think that, if I can get a grower interested in it, then I really got something going on, because, everything's time and money for them because they're the ones doing it. So I really enjoyed, so part of welfare is obviously auditing. So I do some shadow audits and look at belt pinch points in the hatchery, or a big hot topic with laying hens is culling and the macerator. And the macerator is actually pretty humane because it's instantaneous, but sometimes the distance that the chicks have to travel in the pipe could be longer distances. So that's a consideration that I learned through working with industry that I hadn't thought. That what if they have to travel 200 feet? Well, that probably isn't a good experience, even though it's instantaneous death. So a lot of them have a bowl that they go down into that's instant, but stuff like that. And then looking at different breeds. Purdue's very into that, and enrichments. Doing a lot of applied research over on the farms. We did a big circulation fan looking at commercial circulation fans, which someone who knows ventilation in chicken houses would say, well, that's a stir fan. And I guess they're just a little bit bigger stir fans that have higher capacity. So we looked at the behavior of the broilers in terms of like comfort and movement and things like that. And behavior is very, very difficult when there's 30,000 of them, and it's hard to see individuals. So that was challenging. And we also tried to look at vocalizations as well, but I learned a lot. It gets into physics really, really quickly because sound is actually vibrations. And so, like, you measure in decibels and the wavelength and the frequency and things like that. And something that's difficult with vocalizations on commercial farms is there are vocalizations that are the same frequency as the fan noise. And you try to take out the noise, but then you're also taking out some of the vocalizations. So we didn't get as far with the vocalizations as we wanted with that, but it's very interesting work.
Yeah, those are things I wouldn't even think about.
Yes, and field research is so much different than experimental research. In a controlled research setting on our research farms, we try to control for absolutely everything except for the factor that we're looking at, right? Well, in the field, it turns out the power goes out, or a feed line breaks, or a water line breaks, and, there goes everything, or your sensor gets knocked down by equipment. And so it's I like field research because it's like, well, it happens. If we still see an effect of whatever we're looking at, despite seasonality, which is huge, despite house to house variation, flock to flock variation, then that's really telling. I think a colleague of mine once put it really well, where researchers, like in a research setting, we're trying to build the engine of a car, right? Like we're looking at all the different things, the pistons that make it fire, but extension drives the car. Like we give them the engine and they drive it. So I think that's a good way to look at the difference between research and extension.
Yeah, they drove whatever we built, so good luck.
Yeah, good luck. And then they come back and say, well, it broke. Like you didn't consider this thing. Like,
is there anything that you found with working with farmers that was really kind of surprising? Something that they knew a lot about that sort of seemed obvious, but maybe us in the world of academics didn't really think about?
Oh, so many. To think of something specific was sort of tough. But I'll give a really good example with pigs, actually. So I worked at a sow coal plant in Des Moines, and then I worked for Hormel in Minnesota. And I remember having a conversation about my master's work, and it was this willingness to approach tests. So an animal approaching a human is a measure of fearfulness. By the rationale is that I think with broilers it gets a little difficult because they are as motivated to walk and walking ability and things like that. But it's a standardized test across species. But I remember telling a big manager about my project and getting really excited and saying, we want animals to come up to us because then they're less fearful. And he looked at me and said, well, that doesn't work for us because we rely on that fear response for pigs to go past us into the chute. And that was just such an aha moment for me where I thought, and let me tell you, trying to get those fair pigs that like loved people and wouldn't, they were so difficult to work with. So difficult.
Yeah.
They didn't want to go through. They wanted to be around you, right? And that was I think that really kind of was the aha moment that for my career is, sometimes the assumptions in research, you take it out in the field and that's actually contradictory. They actually don't want that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good example.
Yeah, something you wouldn't think about, right? Like, yeah. We sometimes depend on an animal's flight distance to get them to move, herding sheep and whatnot.
Oh gosh. Yeah, especially when it's not a one-on-one. It's not you with one pig and you can move it. It's you and a couple of thousand pigs, and maybe that flight response can be really important.
For sure.
So what are some of the neat topics that researchers are working on right now, or what's needed in the industry? Like what's going on in the land of welfare that is needed and what's going on?
Well, obviously I have some pretty biased opinions about what I think is most important because of what I'm doing. But there's a lot of talk. I already mentioned the culling of male chicks in the hatchery for laying hens. I know there's been a ton of money by our government and other European governments, other governments towards it. I think Germany and France have gone. It is illegal there now.
I didn't realize that. I mean, I knew it was happening, but I didn't realize the legislation had passed.
But I've heard that about 20, they can't set, so it's in ovo sexing, right, to prevent the chicks hatching and being macerated. But I think the technology that's been adopted, at least in France, is it's really just feather sexing in ovo. So they're pretty late in development. And I think that there's a certain line that just aren't feather sexable, so they're having difficulties with that. But mass depop is always one that we don't need to talk about that one, I think, with HPAI, but definitely in the broiler world, it is growth rate, stocking density, and environmental enrichment. The Better Chicken Commitment was first came out. It's this NGO-led initiative that first came out in 2016 that looks at the different components of broiler production: stocking density, breeds, growth rate, and slaughter practices or methods. So really the two main methods are, and the most predominant is definitely water bath stunning. And then the other is controlled atmosphere stunning, which uses CO2, and it's used with pigs too. And I'm not sure what percent of the industry uses CAS for pigs. I know my hometown has it in Marshalltown, but I'm not sure about poultry, but it's interesting being in my role and working with a lot of companies because it's usually someone involved in sustainability. Animal welfare has been linked with sustainability, I think permanently glued now. And I think that there's a lot of disconnects. There are more situations where with the three pillars of sustainability, it's like what? Social, environmental, and financial sustainability. Well, usually those three are not a win-win-win when we're talking about animal welfare. So with controlled atmospheric stunning, carbon dioxide is used. Obviously, that's not a sustainable solution for the environment, but it definitely is better for broiler welfare. However, wing damage is a huge issue, broken wings. During the stunning process, the birds move around, and then that can cause broken wings. And so there's just a bunch of, it depends on your perspective of what's most important. Wings, I think the story of wings is they were marketed for the Super Bowl, and now they're a huge deal. But before that, they were like thrown away into trim and stuff like that. So wings are an important part of the process now. And for animal welfare, controlled atmospheric stunning is better. But even especially during COVID, there was a huge shortage. Like Europe has a lot more CAS systems, and they straight up lost their supply for some of their plants. So.
Oh, I didn't realize that the carbon dioxide was a pinch point.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, where do they get it? It has to be a lot of it.
Oh, yeah, that's so interesting.
It is. I've learned a lot about things that are not exactly animal welfare to have these conversations.
Yeah.
So it's fun to learn. I mean, obviously we're academics because it's fun to learn, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
It's clearly not for the work-life balance.
Yeah, that's true. So it kind of seems like the maceration thing is big in Europe as well as here. We're kind of catching on, and I know there's some different researchers that are working on technologies that are outside of the feather sexing, but there seems to be, I don't remember, I think different countries have a different cutoff date, right, for the embryonic stage where they need to be decided or not before they proceed. But what other big things are going on? So I think there's a division, right, between the I'll say pre-live animal, even though I just really mean the egg stage, right, egg handling, and then what happens after that. It seems to be like different groups work on different things for both of those. Like the live animal has different concerns than the hatchery, if you will.
In terms of animal welfare or handling, or
kind of both, because it's at least the welfare, it's the potential to become an animal, and then what do you do with that animal once it's alive, right? So I think different countries have different thoughts about when do you consider that sentient, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and then what do you do after it is? And is macerating okay, or do we have to raise it? There just seems to be different thought patterns.
Yeah, definitely. So we have 21 days to work with, right? And yeah, I think for, gosh, I don't want to say specific numbers because I haven't checked myself, but I think for IACUC for research, it's day 13 uh, developmentally for like a necessary method to euthanize. Um, and, especially in the life of a broiler, with their growth rate and being around for 6 to 8 weeks, like a third of their life is in the hatchery environment, in the incubator. And certainly, their embryonic development is a little different, even though it's still the same 21 days. You can probably help out with the metabolomics of what would be going on in the egg in a broiler versus a layer, but even that is quite different.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's just crazy. The fuel metabolism switches are kind of insane. The
Mm-hmm.
protein versus carb metabolism. Yeah.
And that fatty liver and everything, and like how in the heck are they alive on that? And
Oh yeah,
yeah, so
it's amazing.
something that we were looking at in my lab is sort of embryonic incubator manipulations. We're currently running a project looking at different light wavelengths in the incubator and how that might affect um, development, but also behavior afterwards. I know that there's a lot of lighting is a huge area of research post hatch. Right, the National Chicken Council guidelines used to have 5 lux for light intensity as the standard. Europe, it's about 20 lux, but they were taken out of the standards in the last few years just because there's not enough conclusive research on what is right for light intensity for chickens. And chickens, their eyes are bigger than their brains, and I have tetrachromatic vision. They have 4 cone color receptors to R3. They can see into the infrared and the ultraviolet light. And I think there's just so much we don't know. Someday I'd love to have chicken goggles so you could see like a chicken does,
Oh,
but
I
I
know.
don't know
I
if
know.
we're near that.
I think I would be overstimulated.
I think so too. Virtual reality makes me motion sick, so I don't know if I'd actually do it, but
Yeah, you would be in big trouble. Uh, so what do you think the role of some of these commitments were coming from companies, or I don't want to say political organizations, but more like bigger governing bodies and then the consumers. So how do all of those come into play with changing something about poultry production? Like how do you fit welfare into what the consumer wants or requests and then what really works for welfare commercially?
I think that laying hens are a really good example of this exactly. Prop 12 in Canada was a ballot initiative, which means that the people put it forth and it went into law. So that was clearly at least a societal decision, maybe not consumers, because NGOs are involved and a lot of animal rights organizations don't want animal agriculture to exist. So they have a lot of the media presence, but there are a lot of consumers that are concerned, and where consumers are becoming more wealthy, obviously with resources and money comes choices, right? So animal welfare is a really sticky conversation to have when you're talking about what a group of people wants versus food security, because oftentimes it costs more for welfare initiatives. So cage-free eggs are more expensive. But when cage-free came about, I mean, with broilers versus layers, I was just having this conversation with someone about enrichments, because it seems like enrichments are going to be adopted nationally here. We don't know exactly which ones are best. That's what we are doing research wise to look into, right? And I was just saying, putting a platform or installing a different light as an enrichment for broilers is not apples to apples with the entire layer industry having to gut, how their entire systems and then rebuilding a new one. There was no really, you can retrofit some, but that poor layer industry with that, they just kind of got bombarded, and a lot of the early systems weren't the best for welfare. There weren't ramps, so a hen from the top tier would fall and collide and have keel bone damage. And so I think that my biggest caution is for consumers is, you think that it's better because they're free from cages, but actually when you look at it, they need certain provisions in there. Yeah, they might have their nest boxes and their scratch pads and their perches, but if they can fall and break something easily, well, then is that better welfare? And I'll stand on my soapbox here. There are some systems have more opportunities to improve welfare than others, but if it is not managed well, none of them are good for welfare.
Yes.
It really is management that's the key to good welfare.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point.
You can let them outside, but then let them outside into a mud puddle, right? So there's a lot of management, and the more extensive systems become, the more management is necessary.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, let them into a puddle, and then the friendly carnivorous birds also know where they are too. So I think the hen would rather be alive than dead, but some of the systems just have, exactly like you said, different management requirements.
And that's also like a debate, an ethical debate with the animal welfare field is quantity versus quality, right? Like, would an animal want to be alive? Well, we're a little bit utilitarian because we're raising them for our consumption. So, but that is sort of I don't want to say vibe, but that's the word I'm thinking of society today is what actually does the animal want? And I love that. And preference testing is a perfect way to ask that. You give them options and then they tell you. There's a little bit, I like to have a little bit of caution with that because certainly humans make decisions that may not be best for their fitness. So yeah, sometimes we need to make sure that, I think about labs. Labs are the service animals because they're so food motivated, so they're trainable. I learned that from one of my students, actually.
They are trainable and they are food motivated, so that's a good example.
I am too. I don't know about trainable, but definitely food motivated.
Yeah, I'm food motivated. Cheese, ice cream, yeah, sign me up. So what are some of the things that or maybe you've kind of already given some examples, but like when you think just about welfare, how would somebody in the welfare space think about it versus somebody in the research versus a consumer? Because the consumer just says, I don't want the bird in cages. The academic says, what are the implications of moving this? And then from a welfare standpoint, you say we have these considerations. So when someone sees a situation, basically, how do you think like an ethologist? Like what does an ethologist think when they approach a situation that may or may not have a welfare concern?
So I learned this from one of my mentors. It depends on the question you're asking, right? Everyone has a different perspective and a different agenda, the consumer versus the researcher. And to kind of answer this and follow up with your question before is it's really interesting talking to different stakeholders because they almost have the same thing to say about each other. The retailer will say like, well, our customers are telling us that we need to do this. So we go to the supplier and say, hey, you need to do this. And then the supplier might push back or the retailer might push back. And the supplier says, well, the retailer's telling us to do, or the retailer's telling us to do this, but like not how, in the case of enrichments, it's, you need to have 1 per 1,000 birds. Well, what is 1? What size does it need to be?
Yeah.
Kind of goes into organic standards with the NOP program. Outdoor access is required, but that's about it. There's no size or vegetation requirements or anything like that. So, of course, with research, you answer a question and then have way more questions at the end than answers to go forward. But that's the same with animal welfare as it evolves. As the researcher, I provide the data and the numbers for decisions to be made, but there's always going to be that ethical component. I like to say that we treat animals better in this country than some countries treat their people. So there's just different socioeconomic constraints on what the best animal welfare decision is.
Oh, yeah, that's sage points. So are there some, I know you've been in the space for quite a while, but are there some changes that you have just really thought like, wow, that's a win for everybody, for the birds and for, the people implementing it, anything, maybe even if it was producer driven in a specific barn or just an overall thought change. I know you said that you like that people are thinking about animals finally and what the animal might want, but is there anything that just kind of like jumps out to you as like a really, really positive change?
Definitely. And I talk about it all the time. It's interesting, I don't want to talk about my age too much, but just talking to people about what I do, very rarely now do I hear people say, "Oh, so you cut animals government checks?" Because that's what welfare is. Like people actually know what animal welfare is now. And I don't hear that. So I actually did recently, and it was the first time in a couple of years, but animal welfare is having a presence. Oftentimes people confuse it with animal rights, right? So animal rights is giving human rights to animals. Animal welfare is actually the science of how they are doing, not placing the human aspect on them. But animal welfare is up in corporate commitments now. And there's an organization called BBFA. It's the Better Business Benchmark for Animal Welfare. And they go on to company websites and look at what they say about animal welfare and grade them and things like that. And that sheet is now part of some investor portfolios. So literally, investors are looking at animal welfare as they make some of their decisions, and I love that. I like that animal welfare is being a part of investor portfolios.
Yeah, that does sound like a big win.
So now it's not just me on my soapbox. It's like, well, people with money actually do look at this too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You have some support for the things you've been basically researching or living with, or you know, actually interacting with producers for the last 10, 15 years. So that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been anything big from like a producer standpoint that they taught you that maybe wasn't something that was abundantly obvious? I know you said just some of the things that wouldn't be good, like the flight zone and whatnot, but I find that some of the welfare concerns from producers are just, well, I don't get guidance on how to implement XYZ, so I don't really know what I'm doing. So I did this and I just hope it's acceptable, but they come up with some great ideas as far as enrichment goes. But
Yeah, they can be really creative. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of considerations that they need to make, especially with broilers, is ventilation. If there's something on the floor that impedes ventilation, then that's a concern for them with, litter being so important in litter moisture and hot burn and foot pad dermatitis. But I really like Purdue's approach to enrichments where they have a contest with their growers and just say, hey, you'll get this pot of money, if you enter this contest and build your own. And I love that grower engagement because they know, right? They're going to be creative. And if you incentivize them, they come up with really interesting stuff. Like one of the winners was just a piece of wood that they could put up on the sidewall, and then they pulled it down and it was on like stilts. Like it's easy, useful. It's not too cumbersome. Cleanup is easy. And it's stuff like that that's just so simple. It seems like in research we get so complicated with things, but there really are simple solutions out there.
yeah, it does sound like and it gets stored out of the way for
Yeah.
cleanup.
But I've definitely been taught a lot, where I get hyper focused on something that I think is really important, and then I talk to a grower and they say, yeah, okay, that'll break. Or something like, okay, but then this is going to happen if I do that. And it's like, oh, I just don't know that next step because I've never implemented it. So, but I think that in having the conversations with all stakeholders in the same room is really what's going to progress and move the needle on animal welfare.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So I think this is the trend where a lot of larger companies are actually hiring someone to be on their team for welfare right? And so they've got somebody with actual input that's employed by the company that kind of understands the company's goals and some maybe milestones they want to reach. But I think that's a positive thing to have a actual team member that's in the welfare space.
Definitely. 1999, I think, or right around there, was the very first time there were any animal welfare standards in the United States.
Huh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so like 23, 24 years is just as long as any company has ever come out with something like that. And that was McDonald's with Temple Grandin. And so like it's still very, very new as a science and a field. And it's kind of I don't want to say sparkly, but that's the word I'm thinking of, because there's always that ethical component, there's just always that sort of gray area where it can't, it's never going to be 100% science.
Oh, yeah. I think it goes back to you have to decide what your what are your pillar I don't want to call them pillars, but what are you going to focus on and what is important to you, and then you have to approach welfare from that standpoint
And that
because
is
not
balance.
perfect. Yeah. So do you have any like up and coming things that you're excited about?
Definitely, yes. So I can share the information with you on the website, but I will be hosting a symposium. The Center for Food Animal Wellbeing will be hosting a symposium, which you spoke at last year. Thank you so much. It's on September 29th here in Northwest Arkansas near campus, but there's also a virtual option as well. It's from 8 to 2 p.m. Central. We have speakers that are not on, it was just poultry last year, but we have some policy, cattle, and equine speakers as well this year. So I'm super excited, and I would love if you could join.
Does your center is for food animal, right? So you cover all the species.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just went to a rabbit operation yesterday.
Oh my gosh, that's so
I didn't
interesting.
even know they had them here, but yeah, and we're doing cattle research as well. So not just
Cool.
poultry, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense for the food animal, but I always just focus on chickens, obviously.
Mm-hmm. A little bit,
Or
obviously.
turkeys, yeah, poultry itself. Are there any other things within the topics that we talked about today that you kind of wanted to hit home a point before we go to our final three questions we ask everybody?
Final point that I want to hit is management. Like involve the people that are actually the ones interacting with the animals, because they're the ones that know, they're the ones that need to care for, they're the caretakers of the animals. So they're the ones that the animal rights organizations have the videos on, create a culture of care, because really it's a trickle down effect from the top to the bottom. And so management is the key.
Yeah,
And talk to your
I
academics to help you provide solutions. I guess, I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, we have good ideas sometimes. Or if we don't know the answer, we can find it because naturals at that. So
Exactly. Yeah. If I don't know the answer, I'm happy to connect you with someone who might, for sure.
It's time for our famous three. Evonik Animal Nutrition is committed to ensure food security and safety while reducing the ecological footprint of animal farming. Its products and services use evidence-based solutions that seek to promote animal welfare and reduce reliance on natural resources. All this is underpinned by long-standing industry partnerships and deep customer understanding. Evonik's focus on efficiency, sustainable, healthy nutrition, and collaborations with livestock farming partners creates value for customers and consumers.
Oh, well, awesome. So before we wrap up today, I want to ask you the three questions we ask every guest. So the first one is what is your favorite poultry resource?
So I don't have it with me because I keep it at home, and that's where I usually do a lot of my writing. But my favorite poultry resource, other than the management guides by Cobb and Region, I seem to look at those all the time, and the NCC standards, National Chicken Council standards. In terms of books, The Behavioral Biology of Chickens by Christine Nickel is something that I consult almost every time I design an experiment. So
Oh,
it's a very
that's cool.
interesting book. I think she might even have a Coursera course on chicken behavior. So it's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
And then the non-poultry one,
Yes.
I call this the Bible. It is called Measuring Behavior. And anyone who does, I get a copy for every single student that I have, and it really is such a good resource for just starting from the very beginning. What is your question that you're trying to answer? Do you use scan sampling versus focal? All of those things, and like how to look at the data, all in that book. Love it.
That sounds like a great book. Maybe I got to write that one down. We have some of those dilemmas as well. So our final question is, if you were going to tell someone how to be successful in the poultry industry, what advice would you give?
Take every opportunity presented to you. I always wanted to work with animals. And I remember I was a transfer student. Actually, I went to community college to Iowa State. And so my classes were signed up for me, and I had a meat class. And I remember just thinking, I don't want to work with meat. I want to work with live animals. And then I ended up working in the meat industry for 2 years. And that experience I use in conversation all the time. And I had no idea the value. Wouldn't want to go back to working in a packing plant, but that knowledge that I learned, I just never would have thought been so useful time and time again. So take opportunities, talk to people. Don't be afraid of failure and people saying no to you, because that will happen. But eventually finding a good advocate that believes in you, you'll get those opportunities. So don't be afraid to try and fail, I guess is my advice.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. Well, thank you for chatting with me today. This was a really fun talk. I always learn a lot with everyone I talk with, and you were no exception. I love that. I love that 1999 was the, are we going to exist? Is it Y2K, or are we going to finally get some welfare? Feel like we might as well do it now, because maybe our computers won't turn on. So
exactly.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.